So the topic of today is, I was talking to somebody recently and they were mentioning how much I follow the news and how much I am unfortunately aware of what's going on in the world, and that's probably why I'm not as happy as I should be. And it brought me back to this meme that I remember. It's the one where, if I can find it, I'll put it up. It's like, I wish I was a girl. I can just be a girl. I was always a girl, and then destroy capitalism is on the bottom. It's one of those brain memes. And I was thinking about why that is. There's a lot of people that are not just trans, but in general, any minority obviously is usually fairly, or at least more aware of what's going on politically. And so this is kind of a way to talk about both things, like being trans and politics. And it's not hard to figure out why that is. I mean, when you decide to transition, you are putting yourself, sometimes you're going from the majority to a minority, and sometimes obviously you're starting out as a minority and you're going into an even tinier minority. So being more socially aware is part of that, because you get a lot of times checked pretty severely with if you think that you're special in any way or normal or whatever, and someone will just come along and be like, no, you're not. I don't know that it happens. It's not obviously everybody, but myself, like, I was completely apolitical for most of my life. And it wasn't exactly, as I transitioned, it was 5 or 10 years in. And I remember it was right around it was before Obama, but it was when the gay marriage thing started to come up. And obviously I have a lot of friends that were wanting to get married, and being aware of just more issues. And once you start to become at all aware, you are hit with a fire hose of all the things wrong in the world. And it can take you in a few different places. And unfortunately, usually it drowns you in horror. Because when there's 8 billion people on the planet, even if things were kind of good, you're still going to be met with untold amounts of horrible things that are happening in the world. Because even if it's a minority of people doing awful things, that still means there's an awful lot of people doing awful things. And if you stare at it, it's like when you're learning to ride a motorcycle. They often will say, don't look at the things that you're trying to avoid. Because if you're going into a turn and you're staring at the guardrail, there is some chance that you're just going to go straight into the guardrail. And it happens. I've watched people when they were learning I took a motorcycle safety class, and I remember people fixating on the cones and kept hitting cones. And the guy was like, look at where you want to go. Stop looking at the stuff that you don't want to hit. Like, your brain tries to get you to go to that place if you're staring at it. And unfortunately, that's a lot of people, their experience with becoming more aware it just drowns you. And I've come to deal with that only after having gone through years of too much, so much too much. And it started with, the first thing I became kind of aware of is, I remember a friend of mine sent me a video about this goober that was talking about climate change. And this guy turns out to be a little bit of a crank. And that was I think the determination both of us came to. But he had a lot of points. And the more you looked into the things he was saying, it wasn't that he was wrong, as he was taking 2 and 2 and coming up with 22 when 4 was bad enough. So that was the first thing. And then you start to see how, okay, well, climate change is obviously happening. Why? We're producing a whole bunch of CO2. That's all coming from fossil fuel, which is a weird name for oil and natural gas mostly, and coal. And then you start to see how those two interact, and you can't have one, you're not going to have one without the other. And then if you stop one, then all of these other things start to stop. So the fact that we're dependent on oil is bad. And then, oh, well, we can't stop oil because everything we use is plastic, and most of that comes from oil. You can't fly airplanes with electric yet. You have all these things that are kind of interdependent. It's just easier to keep doing the thing that you've been doing. And then you can add multiple layers too. You can start to add what's happening to the ocean and how acidification could be really horrible. And you can spend a lot of time in that world. I think the thing that got me out of it, a lot of it, was realizing that as you're reading about overpopulation, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and you're just one of them. So you're 1/8 billionth of the problem. And you can only be, maybe a little better than 1/8 billionth of the solution. And even if you say, oh, well, but if you're in an industrialized country, you carry more of the blame, fair enough. Still, at most, like in the country I live in, I'm 1 in 340 millionth of the problem here, which is weighted heavier than some other places. You're talking about, like, you can't do anything about the entire world alone. And until the world comes to the conclusion that it wants to address something, it's just not going to happen. And a lot of people use that as a reason to become despondent, hopeless. And I find there is some comfort in, at least there's only so much I can do. And so if I'm doing some of those things, I feel a little bit better. And I know that's not enough for everybody. Especially if you have kids and you want things to be better, for them, and for probably even more so for grandkids and people who come later. The problem is, you have a bunch of, right now, rich people that are termed, I think they call them technocrats, or some version of people that think that technology is going to fix everything, because it has fixed things in the past. Like, for example, fertilizer. We were having a problem with potentially not having enough food to feed all of the people that are being born, because the population, humans existed under 500 million for 100,000 years, or probably a lot more than that. And then once you hit 1 billion, and then 2 billion and 3 billion, you start having food issues really fast. So what they found is they couldn't plant enough, they couldn't get enough to grow to feed all those people. And the same guy that created poisonous gas in World War II figured out a way to pull nitrogen out of the air and use that to fertilize everything. And you think, wow, that's cool, everything will fix that problem. All of that fertilizer, that artificial fertilizer, doesn't do the things that would normally fertilize everything. So plants are less nutritious, and then the fertilizer that you're cramming into these plants runs off into rivers and the ocean, causes problems there. But that was a problem that was seen as unsolvable until it was. And so people assume we'll figure out something. And it's not as if you couldn't, if you wanted to. For example, you could come up with a way to pull the constituent particles, elements out of the air and create hydrocarbons with green energy and use that as fuel for cars and airplanes and things. Is that possible? I don't know. But if somebody figured out how to do it and it was feasible, you'd just be reburning the same things and no longer adding. So there are possibilities of things getting solved. It's not just going to be by electrifying everything, because we've decided to not do any more solar and wind. Data centers are going to hog up tons of power, and they put them in places that these things need water too. And there's an argument about how much water they go through, but they put them in deserts where the people there need the water. So you're in a place where there's not a lot to go around, and they're like, no, we need it. And they have a lot of money. So a lot of times they can make that happen. There's a big pushback for these kind of things right now. But we're in a situation where there's just nothing practical that you can do to save the entire planet. You can only hope that at some point people come to a consensus that we need to be a lot more responsible in the way that we not just treat the planet, but the way we repurpose everything and the way we deal with money. And like, are we existing in order to give birth to some super intelligent AI that actually, can solve all our problems? Or if you've watched any movies, destroy us unceremoniously. There is so many versions of what could come from all of what we're doing. And as long as there's people in charge that are going to push things in the same direction, and as long as people just let that happen because they have cheap TVs and plenty of shows to complain about on streaming services, like, there's just no point in drowning in that. I would say if you need to do something about it, do something local, do something close. Like, even Mother Teresa said, if you want to help somebody, find the nearest person and try to help them. You can get involved with all sorts of stuff locally, depending on where you live, but that will produce more results than trying to ignore the national problem and the world problems. And you usually find that you get more out of it too. If you're helping somebody that you're looking at, and it's selfish to say this, but it feels good. If you're just donating to causes halfway around the world that you're not positive what your money goes to, you're trying to buy some sense of peace, but it doesn't usually work. And maybe it does. Do it if that is what makes you feel good. But I would say I'm going to suggest a lot of stuff coming up about how to get involved in things locally, find things that you can do with your hands to better help people that you can then potentially benefit from too. And again, not to be selfish, but there is something satisfying in doing something that you can see the results of. That was a little bit rambling, but I wanted to just talk very quickly about why I am interested in politics and why I'm interested in trying to help people understand what's going on politically and socially, and trying to be very upfront about, I'm not trying to make you worry about this stuff all the time and be miserable. the world is doing a really good job of trying to make people unhappy. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be stuff that involves trying to do something, even if it's tiny, even if it's just for yourself. So that is where I'm going to leave it for this one, and I will see you in the next one.